first one will be conducted by Dr. Claudia Schmucker from the German Council of Foreign Relations, and it deals with Germany. How would the concept of global economic governance look like for Germany and the European Union to reform it? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation and also the kind introduction. I will focus on global economic governance, what it would look like from the perspective of Germany and the EU. It will be more broadly a European perspective, and I will focus a lot on the WTO. So I would like to start with a few general remarks, because currently what we are seeing is that global economic governance is increasingly weakened due to the fact that we are living in a geo-economic environment. We have large global players such as the United States and also China that are increasingly using their market power to shape international relations or to shape regional and global regulatory structures. And this leads to a loss of credibility and a loss of influence of international organizations, such as like the WTO, but also as a loss of importance of informal groups such as the G7 or the G20, which were mentioned before. Therefore, former Chancellor Angela Merkel, it's very weird for me to say former because she's been Chancellor for so long, she stressed that the major threat to the world today that we have is the erosion of international organizations. And what she says is that these institutions that were mainly created after World War II as a lesson are questioned more than ever before. And the imperfection of those institutions, whether that's United Nations or whether that's other international organizations, have come to the forefront of the discussion. And as a result, these institutions are weakened without having newer or better institutions. And this is the reality that we are living in right now. And this is true for the United Nations, this is true for the WTO or for the IMF. So as I said, I will focus on German and European outlook on the World Trade Organization, which from a European perspective is one of the central institutions of global economic governance. And when we look at the WTO, Ole already mentioned that, where does the WTO stand now? The WTO was founded 25 years ago to ensure a transparent and rules-based trading system. And this was mentioned before, it's in its deepest crisis since its creation. All three pillars are damaged. We have the trade liberalization pillar, that's the Doha Round, which was initiated in 2001 as a reaction to the attacks on 9/11, which is basically deadlocked since 2008. There's no agreement anymore among the 164 member states where this institution should head and what is needed. We have the dispute settlement. As of December 2019, no disputes can be resolved at the WTO level because the United States refuses to appoint new members to the appellate body. This has started under the Trump administration, but we see no progress under the present Biden administration. And I doubt that this will change anytime soon. We have the third pillar, which is the review of trade policies, which is the monitoring function. And the aim is to make trade policy transparent also for other members. And this is insufficient because we have insufficient notification of members about their trade distorting measures. On top of it, this was already also mentioned, the WTO has just postponed its ministerial meetings, which was scheduled for last week. And the corona pandemic has once again put a spanner in the works of the organization. And this means that the WTO remains a permanent construction site with all unsolved problems regarding the disputes over vaccines, regarding the TRIPS waiver, regarding the arbitration panels, regarding border adjustment, and a lot of other issues. So what's the view now of Germany and the EU on WTO reform? As you all know, Germany no longer has a trade policy. And the European Commission and the EU conduct trade policy on behalf of the 27 member states, including Germany. Both Germany as part of the EU have a high priority for WTO reform. Why is that? Germany is the third largest trading nation in the world, and the EU as a region is the world's largest trader of goods and services. As such, they are highly interconnected in global trade, and in return, they have a lot to lose if international organizations such as the WTO are no longer functioning properly. So what's the major point that the EU and Germany would like to change. The EU has published 2 very detailed reform papers. The first one in 2018, and the second one this February when they introduced their new trade policy. And the EU has 4 major points how they would like to reform the organization. And I will mention them very briefly. Okay, so we have 4 points that the EU would like to change. I briefly touch on the last point again, which is to restore a sense of common purpose. The EU wants to get the members again together to see where the organization should head. And the EU in this regard wants to focus on the sustainable development goals, because this is where all WTO members committed to. So they want the organization to focus on economic recovery and development, as well as on environmental and social sustainability. And the EU believes that when you focus on these points, this will get more consensus among the member states. The second point is restore a fully functioning and binding dispute settlement system. And this is the most urgent reform for the WTO, for the EU, because they feel that the binding system that was also initiated by the United States, it's a major advantage to the system before that we had under GATT. And so the EU wants to take this as a high priority and does not want to connect it to any other reform proposals. As you know, the EU has an interim arbitration solution. China is part of that. The United States is not part of this. So they feel that this should be one of the steps that we need to change urgently. The third one, revive the negotiation function. In the mind of the EU, the failure to reach any new trade rules is at the heart of the crisis of the WTO. And therefore, the EU wants to change this. And they want to change this mainly through plurilateral agreement, which is kind of like a coalition of the willing. The EU sees hardly any progress on the multilateral level. Therefore, they are looking for groups of countries that are willing to move forward. And we have a lot of negotiations, like the joint statement initiatives on e-commerce, on services, domestic regulation, on investment facilitation that are very important. And the EU would like to propose more initiatives that align also with the focus of the United States on trade and health. What can the WTO do to give answers to the pandemic? And the EU wants to introduce a lot on trade and climate. They want to focus a lot on environmental issues. And lastly, also on workers' rights, which aligns with the Biden administration. A last point, they also want to revive the monitoring function. This is also part of the work that the EU does together with the United States and Japan, also in the trilateral initiatives. So they propose a lot of reforms in this regard. So by concluding, the EU is very much in the driving seat for WTO reform. They have put forward a very ambitious agenda, very detailed and technical sometimes. And the EU really fears that the postponement of MC12 is not losing momentum for the WTO. So they are waiting now for a response from the United States, from China, and from other members to answer the concrete proposals that the EU have proposed. And in my view, if this does not happen, if we continue like this, the WTO will have no credibility left. There is no reason why we should negotiate at the WTO level instead of through bilateral trade relationships. And I think that if this is the case, we will even more turn from a rules-based trading system to a power-based trading system. And this would be a real threat to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schmucker.